towards government services for the 20 million illegal immigrants in the country, according to a recent study. So here to discuss is Matthew Peterson, editor-in-chief of Blaze News, and Daniel Horowitz, host of Conservative Review with Daniel Horowitz and senior editor for Blaze News. So Daniel, let's start with you. Why are Americans unwittingly funding all of this support for illegal immigration?
Well, we're a glutton for punishment. You know, I've been researching this issue, reporting on it for 16 years. And it's not just the numbers. It's qualitatively, this is the worst iteration of the invasion we've ever had. So you cited the study of 150 billion. That does not include a dynamic score of the gangs, the fentanyl trafficking, the child rapists in our communities, our neighborhoods. And then on the schooling, I think that study does cover somewhat of the schooling, but there's the cultural effect. I mean, there are 19 states now where we have more than 1 in 5 children in the public school system coming from immigrant households. Now, they're not all illegal, but a lot of them are. And that's just a measure of the fact that this is no longer America, which honestly is something you can't put a price tag on.
It's strange to me to think how few people probably are aware of this. Am I wrong? Do you think that most Americans understand how much this is draining from their coffers every year?
Honestly, I think outside of the gated neighborhoods, I think that is the difference between this iteration of the invasion and previous ones. Much to my chagrin, covering this, last decade, it never really pulled outside of the single digits in terms of the most prominent issue. This is really the time in history where immigration has become the most prominent, because I think while we often have the cameras at the border, we focus on the border chaos invasion, the cameras actually should be in the neighborhoods. And that's what we're seeing now. It's become so, again, quantitatively but qualitatively bad that you can't ignore it. It's not just an abstract principled issue of maybe fairness or cutting a line. The criminality has become so ubiquitous. I mean, Jill, what you started with that video from Aurora, Colorado, this Aragua gang is a big problem. This is a prison gang from Venezuela that has now come in large numbers, and they are brazen enough to openly attack police. One of the ones that was released by the Biden-Harris administration in El Paso was now, was charged for beating a police officer in Times Square, and we now know exactly when he was released. So the point is, this is a ubiquitous crime issue in addition to the cost issue that is really impossible to ignore. Republicans will never get an issue that is, on the one hand, this grave in consequence, but on the other hand, that is this easy to explain to the American people. You don't need to understand, Austrian economics to take our side of the issue. You see it in your neighborhoods.
We were talking about Massachusetts yesterday, and Massachusetts now is in the news because the Republican Party claims that state officials have refused to give the legal residents any details on $1 billion that they've spent on illegal immigration, and it's prompted the GOP to submit a FOIA request. So are the Massachusetts residents going to get any answers out of this, Daniel?
Well, I think given the orientation of the state and the brain drain of conservatives from that state, I don't think they will get answers because they're hopelessly in the minority. Just like this week in California, likewise, they voted and sent to the governor's desk a bill to give illegal alien homeowners first-time homeowner buyer credits, because we don't have enough of a housing crisis in this country already. This is a warning sign that what's going on in those states are things that we cannot do anything about. We are hopelessly in the minority. But where Republicans do have power, which is in the House at a federal level and in all these red states, that's where they need to push back. And again, at a federal level, Republicans need to have a border fight. No border, no budget. It's that simple. You will not catch and release criminals in the red states. We need to go in the opposite direction. So they're going and giving them benefits in blue states. In the red states, they need to make it a crime to be there illegally. They need to create enhancement penalties for committing a crime while being here illegally and cutting off all benefits so that if maybe the states can't keep them out of the country, at least they can keep them in Massachusetts and California, nowhere else. If our listeners will just go to the ICE Boston office and scroll down, it is remarkable. And this is the Biden administration. Just the past few weeks, the number of child rapists, fentanyl traffickers, and gangbangers that they have arrested that have been released at the border is just remarkable.
Yeah, Daniel, I think it's important for people to understand that we've already seen this happen in California, and it's not talked about enough. I mean, what's happened in California, this happened way before, people started talking about it nationally when you were sounding the alarm. We've already spent the money. We've already seen the consequences. And I think people need to realize, though, it's not just California now, right? The whole point is it's coming to a state near you. I'm hearing stories about, people finding Jamaican gang members in cornfields in the middle of Oklahoma, or also in Oklahoma, the Chinese making drugs in the middle of nowhere. I mean, this kind of stuff is my own brother recently told me a story driving down a rural road in Pennsylvania where there's no one out there. It's a road that we know about. And there was an illegal migrant, because a bunch of them has dropped off in the area, wandering around, and almost like he didn't know what was wrong with him. He had a scooter. He's in the middle of this road. People drive 90 miles an hour in the middle of the country. I mean, it's a very strange scene, and you're right about the cameras. You're so right about that. Can you say a little bit more? Like, we have to show not the border. We have to show this happening all across America in places you least expect, because it's not just going to be an apartment complex that is taken over. That's going to be a town, and it's going to become a state, right? It's going to get larger and larger and larger. You're more in the weeds on this than a lot of people. Where are the next places where we'll start to see really negative side effects in red or purple states?
This is something that I'm very passionate about because, again, domestically, when you deal with domestic vagrants and criminality, there was always this understanding that you can move outside the cities, the big urban areas, and you're safe. And that's true, I think, of our domestic dynamic. But with the importation of illegals, they go everywhere. And this is something I've been reporting on also a lot throughout last decade. These establishment Republicans that feast on the carcass of America in order to pay out the agricultural lobbies that do have a stranglehold over a lot of these more rural red states just so they can get cheap labor. And that's real nice. But what happens is they bring that criminal element to rural areas. Norman Rockwell's America. Obviously, we had Todd Bensman of Center for Immigration Studies, reported on that big colonia in Liberty County, Texas. But we have this growing in many other places, and you're starting to see it even in the school systems as well. Oklahoma is a big one. I mean, they import illegals because you have these Republicans there that love illegal immigration. At the same time, they legalize marijuana. So, yeah, you get the convergence of the two. And here's the thing, Matt. You bring up Oklahoma. The state passed a law to criminalize illegal presence. It was the first state to do it. Now, of course, they bring it to court, put an injunction on it. But the governor created a task force to rather than seeing how to implement the law, to do the exact opposite, to invite them to give them state-based driver's licenses, work permits, and visas. And they talk about welcoming immigrants. Now, if you're a legal immigrant, you're getting federal papers. You have a work permit, and you could get a driver's license in all 50 states. It means for illegal aliens. So here's the deal. While we have every Republican is speaking out against the border. That's different from when I started on this beat. But what hasn't changed is ultimately focusing on the way this issue matters in the red states, demagnetizing the presence of illegal aliens. The same Republicans don't want to do anything about it, and in fact, they want to encourage them more. They are working in states like Idaho and Oklahoma to give them driver's licenses.
Daniel, my final question for you. Everybody you talk to will either say Kamala Harris is lying or flip-flopping about her stance on immigration. Give me your 60-second take on what Kamala is doing on the border.
I don't blame her. I mean, the bottom line is Harris and the Democrats cannot survive a sustained focus on this issue. You know what I'm saying? A lot of Americans have been acculturated to dependency, certain programs, but nobody wants to fund other countries' bad people, child rapists, fentanyl traffickers, and gangbangers. I mean, this is not something they can defend, which is why my elevator pitch is, if Republicans want to win this election, they have a budget fight, not on funding Head Start or some of these, fights we've had in the Gingrich era. over funding other countries' criminals, catch and release of foreign invaders, foreign criminal aliens. It's that simple. If Republicans have a budget fight over that, then every day the news will be about their top issue. And frankly, there's no way she could sustain a win without changing her view on that.
Daniel Horowitz, you're the best. Thanks so much for joining us.
Speak to you later.
Politico bashes JD Vance for tying Kamala Harris to Joe Biden. We'll revive some of their own reporting on the Biden-Harris administration coming up. This week, Politico claimed that JD Vance is attempting to tether Joe Biden to Kamala Harris during a Michigan rally. In a recent piece for theblaze.com, Joseph McKinnon pointed out that there's always been a push to refer to this current administration as the Biden-Harris administration. Back in 2021, Politico reported for personnel announcements during the transition, officials were told to use quotes from both Biden and Harris. And all administration officials refer to the Biden and Harris administration instead of saying what's easier to say, the Biden administration. So here to discuss with us is Chris Bedford, senior editor for politics and Washington correspondent for Blaze Media. So Chris, what's going on? Why are we now trying to say that Biden and Harris are two separate entities here?
Because it's politically advantageous to do so. To tie Kamala Harris to Joe Biden for the first couple of years was something that raised Kamala Harris's profile. It helped show that the Democrat Party wasn't ruled by a bunch of old white people, despite Chuck Schumer and Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi being up there. Look, there's also Harris. But now that the Joe Biden administration is so historically unpopular, they don't want that anchor around Harris's neck. Now they want to pretend, oh, this is Republicans pouncing. This is not something that's actually been real for years. And sometimes this is actually helpful. A lot of people in D.C. are kind of evil. They're completely partisan. They really want to push an agenda. They're willing to lie and cover things up in order to get there. But a lot of them are also very stupid. And the reporters and the editors who posted this headline just give you a peek behind the curtain. They let you realize, oh, this is exactly what they're trying to do. Politico went back and stealth edited that headline. They didn't issue any corrections or anything like that, but they changed the headline because, well, someone had pulled the curtain back accidentally.
Gotta love just saying it out loud. Chris Bedford today. A lot of them are just stupid.
They're just stupid.
Yeah, borderline retarded, as I like to say. Let's talk about how this works, because I think this is hilarious, and in some ways, like when you just look at it, and because it doesn't seem like it would be that effective when you've been in the public eye, right, for this long. I mean, who are you trying to fool? But I could be wrong about that. I mean, do you think it'll be effective in some way, this separation?
It's all about vibes. It's just what this campaign is trying to run on. How does it make you feel? Do you feel like Kamala Harris is part of this? These are not the droids you are looking for. And maybe it will work on a number of voters. I mean, it certainly worked at the DNC. If Joe Biden had been in Chicago accepting the nomination for president, I suspect that you would have had tens of thousands of planned protesters and rioters who'd already intended to come there screaming about his policy in Israel. Kamala Harris promises to continue those policies. She's changed nothing. But the only people who showed up, essentially, were outnumbered by the press. The riots that people, including myself, were kind of counting on, seemed to have, or expecting, dissipated because of a change in candidate. This youth energy that they give Kamala Harris, she's somehow different, even though she's the same. You know, it kind of reminds me of the way Republicans have somewhat done this. And you heard this with independents in the past. When John McCain was the Republican nominee for president, the amount of people walking around saying, I didn't like George W. Bush, but I could really support John McCain. Well, explain to me the difference in their policies. They really didn't have it. And it was all the same reasons, the Iraq War, this or that. Well, John McCain agreed with George W. Bush on almost all of those. This happens every time now and then with politics, but have the press so shamelessly push it is a whole other story.
In a more serious tone, earlier this week, we did cover Trump's visit to Arlington National Cemetery. And of course, Biden and Harris were noticeably absent. But 2 months ago, Biden put out this ad footage of a presidential visit to an American cemetery overseas attacking Donald Trump.
Why should I go to that cemetery? It's filled with losers.
Filled with losers.
It's filled with losers.
This was a cemetery that Donald Trump didn't want to go to because it was pouring rain that day.
The contrast couldn't be any more stark.
We have a president who went to Ukraine through a combat zone. We have another presidential candidate who couldn't get his hair wet.
A good commander-in-chief is somebody who gives a
So, Chris, what should Americans make of the difference in messaging from these actions by Biden and now Kamala Harris?
So first off, the Bedford story put forward by Goldberg over the Atlantic was the most one of the more laughably stupid stories of the entire freakout. And it shows you the willingness of people in the press to believe a silly caricature of Donald Trump because they never really understood him nor tried to. Donald Trump is someone who would be willing to call a war hero a loser if that person attacked Donald Trump. If someone from Belleau Wood rose from the dead and said, "I hate you, Donald Trump, you're a bad president," he would probably say something mean back. There is no history anywhere of Donald Trump going through American history and insulting random war dead. That's insane. You had people who do not like Donald Trump, like John Bolton, who was on the record having witnessed this, who said it wasn't true. The whole thing was a lie and Democrat staging. And then you've got this whole thing going on right now with Arlington. We're on the 3-year anniversary of the Afghanistan withdrawal tomorrow, the disaster, the people who promised to bring norms and American respectability and prestige back if they just got rid of Donald Trump. Well, those people ended up really crushing American prestige in a disastrous, although long overdue, withdrawal from Afghanistan. And the way the press wants to talk about it is not through the fact that Joe Biden never met with these families, aside from on the tarmac, where he was constantly checking his watch. Another thing they tried to disprove, but we have it on camera. The Joe Bidens refused to take phone calls from these families. The Joe Bidens refused to actually meet up. The Kamala Harris is the first member of this administration to really mark the anniversary because it's politically inconvenient. They invite Donald Trump to Arlington Cemetery. Donald Trump comes. They ask for press to come so it can be, quote, tastefully captured, the moment. And the press wants to act like this is some kind of attack on the sacred dead or attack on our veterans. Well, it doesn't fly with the reality of any bit of the situation. And it kind of fits. I'm writing my Beltway brief about this right now. It fits into the constant fake outrage and the scandals that become kind of like white noise. They surround Donald Trump so much. Well, it always seems like there's some new awful thing going on. If you ask people to recall just all the scandals that he was accused of just 4 years ago, if you ask your Trump-hating neighbor, give me some examples. Now, let's not talk about January 6th. Give me some examples of what he did. They can't cite anything that was real. It was either fake or they can't remember it because it was all just noise.
Chris, let's talk about Trump for a bit. We are hearing news, people are passing around the news that maybe he's ahead and the opposite, right? There's a reverse bump going on. We've seen him go on podcasts. We've seen him go to Arlington Cemetery. Am I crazy, or does it feel like things are going pretty well for the Trump campaign right now?
There's an obvious and notable upswing. The chirping and infighting from the campaign has taken a back seat. Donald Trump has returned to campaigning after what was a couple of weeks kind of rest. I can only expect had something to do with the fact that he had been shot in the head on stage at a campaign event not too long earlier. He's got a heavily packed campaign schedule, and keep in mind also at the same time, Kamala Harris has withdrawn from the campaign trail. Tim Walz is not allowed to go out and give interviews until tonight when he's with Kamala because they're afraid he won't be able to explain the policy that she's still coming up with in her head as we speak. And she's taking essentially 2 weeks off to prepare for this debate against Donald Trump. And then you've got Nate Silver's model, who was, despite being wrong, one of the only major pollsters to say I was wrong and work to correct their model after 2016, and has been a pretty reliable source largely ever since. He's coming out and saying, it looks like Donald Trump's regaining the lead. this Kamala Harris momentum that is built on vapors, we may be beginning to see the end of it, which would be bad news for Harris because the early voting is just a few weeks away.
Chris Bedford, I expect an excellent Beltway brief from you tomorrow morning.
You'll be getting it.
All right. A California lawmaker will join us to explain why Gavin Newsom's sweep of homeless encampments is just for publicity. Next. Last month, California Governor Gavin Newsom issued an executive order ordering local governments to urgently address homelessness encampments. And Republican Californians, though, they believe that this is more of a PR move than actual policy. So here to break it down for us is California State Representative Bill Essayli. So, Bill, thanks for joining us. So why do Republicans in California believe that this is some PR stunt by Gavin Newsom instead of the actual policy from him?
Well, I don't think it's a PR stunt. I think they actually do believe this. They want to provide homeowners assistance to illegal immigrants. That's what's going on in California. So, but the other stuff he's doing is a stunt. But the bill they did last night is not a stunt.
Can you explain a little bit more for our audience what this bill entails?
So last night, the state assembly, which I'm a part of, passed a bill that allows illegal immigrants to apply for a program that will give them up to 20% homeowner assistance down payment. So they could get up to 20% of a loan as a down payment free of charge from the government to buy a home. It's meant to help first-time home buyers get into a home in California, which is so unaffordable. The program is extremely popular. Last year, only 10% of the people that applied received any type of award. And what this bill did last night was expand the program, so now illegal immigrants are eligible to apply for it as well, which is just insane.
Can you explain just to our audience just how bad the homelessness population is in California and how it's expanding? Because we know it's big, but I don't think we have any context for this.
You know, California is, I believe, only 20 or 30% of the nation's population, but we have almost half of all the homeless people living in the state of California. California has basically set up incentives for people to live here. We don't enforce any of our crimes. They can use drugs without any consequences. They won't be forced into any shelters or treatment programs. They get all kinds of assistance from the government so they can live comfortably on the streets. And I mean, look at that, what you have up there. I mean, that's what our cities have turned into. If you go to LA, San Francisco, Sacramento, that's what our cities look like. Now the governor all of a sudden is taking this seriously, and I think that has more to do with his future presidential ambitions than any real genuine concern about cleaning up the problem.
Bill, as someone who moved from California 3 years ago to Texas, I'm one of those who found a home here, and my wife is from Sacramento. We love Sacramento from afar. A lot of people have left, and as they leave, they also bring with them votes that could go to oppose these policies and, really support in a way for you and what you're trying to accomplish. What are your thoughts about that? And do you have thoughts about how you reclaim California?
The Democrats have done such a good job of demoralizing our constituents, our base, our taxpayers, our citizens, all what I call normal people. And people have just sort of given up and they said, you know what, I'm just going to cut bait and move out of state. And I always tell people, my parents immigrated from a third world country. California was a great place to grow up and live. And I'm not going to give up on it. I don't think we should give up on it. We should stay and fight. You're right. I think we would have a much better chance of fighting if not as many people have left, because those are, frankly, our voter. They're probably Republican voters. However, there is hope. And I tell people this, the last 3 updates we've had from the Secretary of State in California on voter registrations, they update about every 6 months. For the last 3 updates, Republicans are now outpacing Democrats in voter registration. So we have people now joining the Republican Party in greater numbers, and you actually see people leaving the Democrat Party. So something is happening. It's still a huge gap. It's going to take a while to get there, but the trend is turning. And what I'm looking for this November is to see how many seats in our state legislature we can actually take away from Democrats. We're very close to taking, I would say, at least 3, maybe 4 seats. Ultimately, we need 9 seats to break the supermajority.
Now, Bill, I read this morning that the California legislature has passed a bill banning local governments from implementing voter ID laws for local elections. Now, California as a state doesn't require IDs to vote, but there was an edict in Huntington Beach that required them to have the voter ID requirements there. But if this does go into place, the state law would then take over what Huntington Beach has. So what can you tell us about what is going on with the voter ID laws there in California?
So this is a great case study in liberal logic. So obviously we have tons of illegal immigrants pouring over the border. Anybody who interacts with the DMV or frankly just goes online is able to register to vote. There is no verification process. All you do is check a box that says that you certify you're eligible to vote. And so what one city did, local city of Huntington Beach, they took matters in their own hand. They said, you know what, if the state of California isn't going to adopt voter ID, we'll do it on the local level. And that's what prompted this bill. So they actually now brought a bill saying, well, whether or not voter ID is a good thing, we should regulate it at the state level. So we're going to ban this practice by the locals. So I introduced actually an amendment to call them out. I go, well, you're just worried about locals kind of going rogue. San Francisco and Oakland both allow non-citizens to vote in school board races, both of them. So I introduced an amendment. I said, we'll ban that too. And they refused to hear the amendment. They didn't want to talk about it. So I just think it exposes their true agenda. They are complicit with voter fraud. They don't mind if people come in. They don't mind if people register to vote, and they don't mind if people vote and get away with it. They're not going to do anything to stop it. And when you call them out on it, they're going to tell you you're crazy, you're an election denier, there's no evidence. Well, there's no evidence because you don't check. It's hard to have evidence when there's no checks in place. So that's what's going on. And you know what I think will happen in California? We need to get a ballot initiative to require voter ID. I actually think it's very popular, and the people of California would pass that. So we got to go around the legislature ultimately.
That would be fantastic. I mean, congratulations also on that maneuvering you were just describing, getting them to show their hand and caring enough to do it. I want to go back to, sort of your California strategy or your thoughts about this. I think there's a widespread recognition now as opposed to 10, 15 years ago when I was thinking about doing a reality show, producing a reality show based on corruption in California, right? Now I think everyone knows how bad the local many of the local governments and the governments in California is in terms of corruption. Trust is way down. And so you have both sides here I want you to talk about. You're describing, though, a populace that realizes how bad things are, realizes how corrupt people are, and is, in fact, starting to leave the Democratic Party. And then we're also seeing Newsom, changing, maybe he wants to run or whatever, but he's, flip-flopping on things. And is there more going on? Are there more politicians moving in a more moderate direction? And are there more people speaking out? Can you just give us more?
Yeah, I'll tell you what's going on in California. First of all, I do think Newsom is an outlier when it comes to politicians in California. I'm no fan of Newsom. I think he's terrible, but he's probably considered moderate compared to the people we have in the legislature. He actually vetoes bills that these people pass. So Newsom is a lot of things, but he's not politically stupid. I think he's very good at reading tea leaves and being what he needs to be in the right moment. He's also a very convincing liar. So that's Newsom. The politicians here are totally drunk with power. The Democrats have a supermajority in the assembly. They control 62 out of 80 seats. They have such a radical agenda, whether it's dealing with school boards, overriding local school boards, parental notification policies. They want to indoctrinate kids in this gender ideology stuff. They're now pushing Planned Parenthood to open up clinics on school campuses. And I haven't even touched the crime stuff. So I think what I hear from my constituents and at the local level is people aren't really sure where it's coming from or who's responsible, but they know California isn't working. And they're really disturbed about the policies affecting their children. They're very disturbed about the affordability crisis. Things are so expensive here in California, whether it's the grocery store, gas prices, home prices. And when they hear things like the government wants to give handouts to help illegal immigrants buy houses, meanwhile, they're struggling to even pay rent. That's the kind of stuff that wakes people up and makes them say, wait a minute, what the heck's going on here? And that's where it's the job of the Republican Party to communicate on that and let them know who's responsible, that it's the Democrats who are responsible for these policies. Whenever they pipe up about something, I say, we haven't decided anything in about 15 years here. You guys are solely responsible for this. And we got to put that squarely on their shoulders and get people out of the Democrat Party into the Republican Party. And the biggest group I see moving are Hispanics.
Bill Essayli, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Time Magazine defends big food companies after RFK Jr. after this. Last Friday, RFK Jr. explained that a major factor in his decision to endorse Donald Trump was the opportunity to join the administration and help make America healthy again. Then, on Monday, Time Magazine ran a piece titled, "What if ultra-processed foods aren't as bad as you think?" Well, here to discuss this is BlazeTV host of 4-Minute Buzz, Hilary Kennedy, and Jessica Solce, founder of The Solarium, that highlights companies that create holistic products. So Jessica, let's start with you. Is there any way that the ultra-processed foods aren't that bad as this article is trying to tell us?
Oh, absolutely not. I find the entire idea illogical that we are even having this discussion. We know that chemicals, pesticides, GMOs, emulsifiers, natural flavors, all of these things, we know they are bad for you. There is no longer a discussion. It can only be clickbait, this continued discussion, and we need people to no longer talk in these illogical terms and get back to what food is. It's just no longer discussion to me, and the fact that the Times could write something like this just means that people are no longer embracing logic and looking at food as something that should be curing us and not hurting us.
Hilary, why do you think, I'm curious what you both think about this, why are they publishing this? Why is this happening?
Well, it's become pretty trendy and cool to politicize food and say that if you are telling people that they shouldn't be eating ultra-processed foods, then you're an elitist or you're racist, because so many people that are in lower socioeconomic groups are forced to get foods that aren't as healthy. Maybe they can't afford fresh and organic. But my argument there is it costs far less for you to buy an apple for a snack than it does a bag of Doritos. You can still get access to healthy foods. Now, are we educating those groups as much as we should be? No, we definitely aren't. I mean, we aren't educating anybody as much as we should be on how to eat healthy anymore. But you can also supplement your diet with things like beans and lentils. It might not be the stuff that you crave, but you can eat healthy on a budget. We see people in third world countries do it every single day.
Jessica, what's your take on this? What do you think changed for them to come out and just say, oh, you know what? We're just going to go ahead and throw this cover here up on Time Magazine?
I absolutely agree with you that it is, it's important to educate people that they can eat healthy outside of the ultra-processed foods. But at the same time, we are encountering a media environment that's just using these moments to discuss these very important topics as political issues. And they are using this as like sledgehammers just for political reasons and not really caring about the socioeconomic issues of food and how it hurts actually those that are poor, who need more it's backwards how we think of this. We know that processed foods are linked to all the chronic diseases. We know that obesity is 40% higher and takes 40% of Americans. Excuse me, this is the first time on here. We know these things, and it affects everyone, and it affects the poor and the rich, every single race, and that we're actually saying that this does not exist is just hurting. It's just hurting everyone. We have to go back.
And Hilary, when you look at what is going on in just your own family, I know that you have had these battles with your oldest child and trying to say, no, this is the way that it has to be. Can you enlighten us on what you're dealing with at home?
Well, my 5-year-old, we can tell a huge difference in his behavior when he's having something ultra processed with food dyes and synthetic chemicals in it. And so just the other day, he was asking me why he couldn't have goldfish for a snack, and all of his friends at school were able to have that. And I said, well, because it's got stuff in it that doesn't make you feel good. And he hasn't quite put 2 and 2 together the way we have, but we can see an instant change in him when he's eating that stuff versus when he's having an apple, or if we give him a green juice instead of a sugary smoothie that we got out somewhere. But as time has gone on, I think he's realized I sleep better. I'm able to think better at school when I eat healthy. And I feel like if we start them off young saying, hey, you can't have this, but we can swap it out for this. This is healthy and it makes you feel good. It makes it easier as time goes on. I'm glad we started early because I can't imagine trying to do this with a teenager. Because once you establish those bad habits, they're really hard to break. I mean, they're hard as an adult to break because I would rather eat the goldfish too than an apple sometimes. But I know that's not what's best for my body or his body. So it's an uphill battle for sure.
I feel like I still struggle with the fact that I just thought everyone knew this, and you know it, but you don't do it. And that's what I thought growing up. We all knew that. My parents were, I guess they were pretty based because they were like against seed oils and everything else. And the other thing you notice with kids is, I challenge anyone out there, if you want to talk about the effect on them, right? Go and look up the medical official effects of being high on cocaine. And come back to me and think about how your 5-year-old is, on Easter Sunday. It's like an inflated sense of self, talking rapidly all around, right? And then followed by a crash. I mean, this seems like common sense. And that's what I'm struggling with. How do we get to this point? Maybe the better question for both of you is, how do we get out of this?
That's really tough. I mean, I think until enough people realize that there are corporate interests that are driving these food companies, are dietary guidelines that they put out now, they're more confusing than anything. People have to wake up and know this is all being driven by the dollar. They don't have your best interest in mind. And that's why in the United States, obesity is a huge problem, which is why now we've seen a huge surge in people wanting to use Ozempic and things like that, which the food companies are now very upset about because then people eat less. It's creating a whole new argument there. But I just think education, for one, which is why I really respect what RFK Jr. is doing, coming out and saying we need to make America healthy again. But it is tough because taking the time to figure out what's in the food you're eating is difficult because I do it every day with my kids. And I think one thing, too, about the dietitian that wrote this article for Time saying, I felt better after eating ultra-processed foods for 6 weeks or whatever. Okay, so maybe she says she felt better, but did she do a physical? Did she run labs? Did they do blood tests? Because I want to see, but was your body, you may have felt better initially, but is your body in a better place?
Yeah, Jessica, is there any hope to make America healthy again?
I absolutely. I think there should always be hope. And it starts in homes, right? We have our children, we have our families, we build from there. And if the FDA is going to exist, we have to hold them accountable. Why are there 10,000 additives allowed in the United States and only 2,000 in the EU? Why do they allow microplastics in food and chemicals and poisons at certain degrees, but it's allowed in that amount in a food? So we just have to have more accountability, and we have to have people in charge that are willing to really shift the system and go after the corporations too.
Hilary, one final word?
Yes, no, I agree with her completely. We need to see who is funding all of these studies and funding the dietitians who are putting out these studies saying like ultra processed is really not that bad. If you follow the trail of the money, you can figure out why we're all becoming dumber, fatter, lazier, sicker, all of those things. But she's right. There's always hope. We can always do better, be better. And once we inform ourselves, share the information like we're doing today, it'll put us on the right track.
All right, now I can't eat any goldfish. Hilary said
I ruined it.
There it is. Ladies, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate your time. Our next guest will tell you how to live to dress rather than dress to live. Up next. How should men dress? Blaze reporter O.W. Root argues that while men should care about their appearances and clothing, they should also dress for the work that they're doing. So he joins us now to discuss. So O.W., give us your quick thesis on men's fashion.
Men's style is something that it often gets swept under the rug. You know, people think it doesn't matter, especially guys. They think it doesn't matter. They're told they're not really supposed to care about how they dress. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't really impact their day-to-day life, but it really does. It impacts our psychology. It impacts the way we approach the world, and obviously the way we are in the world. You know, a lot of people complain about the sort of degeneration in terms of architecture, but we can't really change that often, some of us, unless we're architects. But with our clothing, we can. And so there's no reason to dress poorly.
Tell us about what you say in this article in terms of living to dress rather than dressing to live. Explain that.
You know, this is so hard. And I get why guys have a hard time with this, because they start to care about their clothes. They say, I want to look decent. And they spend $100 on a shirt and they don't want to hurt it. And it's such a slippery slope where you can end up being a mannequin, being like a doll, essentially neutering yourself, essentially becoming a man, not of action, but just someone standing there. And what it means to live in your clothes is to put your clothes on in the morning and forget about them. Put them on and then just live your life. It doesn't matter if you get stains or rips or tears or anything. You can fix those things. You can. That's why we have a soap. And so we must not become mannequins. We must not be dolls. We must look good, but forget it once you dress yourself in the morning and go about your life naturally.
So everybody likes to talk about the movements or the trends that are going on. So are there any trends that go and kind of coincide with dressing to live?
You know, actually, it's kind of interesting. We are seeing some guys moving away from the skinny fit, the super tight fitting, slim fit stuff, and moving more into the sort of roomier fit, the traditional fit. A lot of the new J. Crew stuff actually is kind of moving back toward their more traditional approach. And this is a real welcome development, because skinny fit and the whole, you know, the ultra undersized suit trend that was so popular for a while, that's a perfect example of not being able to even move in your clothes. You know, you can't even, you're just like this, you're just walking around like a doll. And so the movement towards or away from skinny fit, even if it's brief, that is really something that facilitates living more naturally in your clothes.
Yeah, can you talk about that, the difference between sort of quality clothing and then, you know, paying exorbitant amounts of money for something that's essentially a piece of plastic with a brand on it?
Yeah, exactly. You know, in American style, in Ivy style, in preppy style, we love the Oxford shirt. And the Oxford shirt, you can buy an Oxford shirt for, honestly, on eBay, you can buy them for $50, $40, and they'll last a decade. And it will actually look better the more beat up it gets. That's the beautiful thing about it. Nobody likes a brand new Oxford shirt. You like one that's a decade old, that has some fraying around the collar and around the cuff. And that's something that lasts. That's something that lives with you. That's something that you carry with you in your life. That's different than spending $300 on some synthetic athleisure garbage that if you disturb it at all, if you rip it at all, it looks awful. It's a totally different mindset.
Now, we might be hitting a hot button issue here, so warning out there for people. You recently wrote an article saying that Crocs proved that Idiocracy was a documentary. So what do you have to say to all of the Croc lovers out there?
To all the Croc lovers, I'm sorry. I know the truth is painful, but someone has to say it. And I mean, Crocs, as I said in the article, if you went back in time and showed your grandfather, hey, check these out. What do you think about these? He'd say, these are disgusting. These are awful. These are ugly. They're terrible. And then if you told him, guess what? People wear them a lot in public. I think he might say, I think you're joking with me. You're lying, right? I mean, they are a move away from, they're a move towards androgynous slop. They're a move toward the primordial stew. If the heel for women is this alluring shoe, or if the loafer for men is this shoe of dignity in natural materials, Crocs are just amorphous slop. I'm sorry to say it, but there are so many better shoes. And if they say they're comfortable, listen, I really go on about comfort fetish a lot because we're obsessed with being comfortable. But a worn-in boat shoe that is a decade old is more comfortable than any Croc. Anybody who knows.
This is you're speaking the truth, the hard truths to the people. You should know the whole point of a line, right, is to ask these questions and to get back to how we should live and what we should wear. And these questions are important. So, now you have to solve the world's problems with a minute left. How do we get out of this? How do we start making better choices?
We need to realize that it's not just about the material. It's not just about this thin material here. It's more. Our clothes say something about our culture, say something about who we are. They say something to ourselves about ourselves. When we dress in a way that makes us feel strong, we approach the world in a way that is more strong. If you dress like a clown, you feel like a clown. And that's a lot of this sort of dark and gloomy sort of attitude these days, I think is related to not realizing that there's a deeper purpose for clothing. And it's supposed to help us. It's supposed to make us feel better, not worse. And so when I rip on Crocs, it's not to be cruel to the Croc lovers. It's to say that you can actually feel better about yourself.
O.W. Root, that might be my favorite 2-minute segment when you ripped on Crocs. So thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate your time.
Thanks a lot.
Peterson, do you own Crocs?
No, I do not. I'm an adult.
Oh, okay.
No,
but is it
I'm
okay
sorry.
for the children?
Sorry. I think that there's probably Crocs at our house for maybe some of the kids. I don't know. I mean, what they're sloppy with are those same material kind of sandals, right? Okay. They'll put those on. But I mean, I know people can laugh and say these things are arbitrary, et cetera, but I think we're at a time where we do want to think more seriously about how we relate to products and services in order to live a better life. Because you can't trust what everyone else has been telling you this entire time, because you see the problem with the culture and the problem with the people who run these corporations. It's turning us, down a bad path. So, it's funny, but it's also, there's some serious aspect to this. How should you dress? Yeah. I mean, when you dress, it's in respect to other people around you, right?
Well, it goes back to the processed foods, the dressing, everything goes into taking care of yourself, getting your appearance right, getting what you eat right. Everything just builds upon itself and just taking care and taking pride in what you have.
Yeah, I think in the past you could just say, I'll go along with whatever the trend is, it doesn't matter. But now we live in a time where the trends are bad, so we have to rethink all this stuff, unfortunately, and we're here to help you do that.
All right, be sure to subscribe to Blaze News tonight on your favorite podcast platform, and we'll be back on Blaze TV tomorrow.